In House of the Dragon, it's pretty clear that Rhaenyra has little to no relationship with any of her siblings. Despite sharing a father and blood ties to a dynasty centuries old, the connection between the two halves of the family is absolutely abysmal to say the least. And it seems as if most days Rhaenyra doesn't even seem to consider them to be related to her. But once upon a time, there was a moment when Rhaenyra actually seemed excited by the prospect of having another addition to the family. When the show first starts, Rhaenyra, while worried for her mother, is open to the idea of no longer being an only child. She goes to the dragon pit, picks out an egg for a potential sibling, and even picks out a name for them. But instead of hoping for a son like her father, Rhaenyra wanted a sister. But unfortunately, she is denied both, as the child is born a boy, and Balon the babe dies mere hours later. But what if things had turned out differently? What if instead of a myriad of half-siblings, Rhaenyra had a full-blooded sister? One last connection to her mother, Aemma. Let's find out. The story opens the same as before. The heir's tourney grows fierce. Rogue Prince Daemon and Criston Cole endure a furious contest of arms. And while that happens, Queen Aemma Arryn endures her own battle with the birth of her child. It's a long and arduous process that eventually draws King Viserys away from his festivities. It's a very bleak situation, and the Maesters only have one solution for the king. It pains Viserys to make it, but he needs to take the chance, even at the cost of his own wife. It's a terrible process, for none more so than the queen, but as her screams go silent, the cries of a newborn take their place. It barely registers for the king, until the maester snaps him out of his haze with congratulations on his newborn daughter. He hears the words, but doesn't look up from his wife's body. Something about the news seems to crush him even further. It's a girl, not the boy he'd been certain of this entire time. The boy he saw in his dreams, the one who wore the crown of Aegon the Conqueror. It had been that desperation, that dream of an heir that had pushed him into making that final decision. Not just saving his child, but his succession. Even if she had been born a boy, killing Aemma would have been no less terrible and traumatic. But for whatever reason, through no fault of her own, the child being a daughter seemed to add another layer of pointlessness to this already painful situation. Had he sacrificed his wife on a pipe dream? Was his vision wrong the entire time? He feared the thought of answering those questions, even if they were internal. The maester asked if he and the queen had decided on a name. Viserys keeps his head down as he ponders, still reeling from what he's done. He hadn't thought of one. Neither of them had, in truth. Since the day Aemma had announced her pregnancy and the dreams first filled his mind, he had been so consumed with thoughts of a boy, he hadn't considered the alternate possibility. He wanted a Balon, someone to carry on the legacy of his father, and his own, but he had to think of something else now. It took some time, but eventually a thought came to him. His thoughts drifted back to the washtub where his wife had laid soaking. It pained him to remember that moment, but he had to for what she said in it. Rhaenyra had already answered the question for him. The king barely manages to lift his head, eyes red and swollen as he weakly utters in a cracked voice the child's name. Visenya. Baby Visenya is born a very strong girl. Unlike her counterpart Balon, she's not at risk of death mere hours after her birth. So when the time comes, only one body is set upon the funeral pyre. Viserys appears dejected, still not having fully accepted the death of his wife, despite his active role in it. His body is present, but his mind appears elsewhere. Rhaenyra holds her infant sister during the procession. She herself barely manages to keep the emotion at bay as she looks upon the woman she once called mother. But as per her uncle Daemon's words, she needed to be strong for her father and newborn sister. Someone had to be, so she orders Syrax to set the pyre aflame. In the aftermath that follows, King Viserys is summoned to a council meeting to discuss his succession. With Aemma dead and her last child being a girl, the king's heir once again comes into question. He's presented with options: Prince Daemon, the only other Targaryen male in the family, and Princess Rhaenyra. But like canon, Viserys refuses to entertain these discussions, to choose between the two people who are closest to him, especially so soon after the death of his wife. Sowing further division in the family right now is not something that he wants to do, and there's really no cause for it at the time. Daemon, in light of Aemma's death, takes to his usual duties with the city watch, keeping the city in line, even if his methods are less than savory. Unlike the canon timeline, there's no party on the Street of Silk, or at least when the men of the watch do decide to wind down, there's nothing to celebrate or mock, I should say. In light of Queen Aemma's death and the birth of his niece, The heir for a day phrase is never uttered by the rogue prince or any of his companions in this timeline, as Prince Daemon has never faced any form of tragic, short-lived competition. The night is simply marked as another tasteless endeavor of the rogue prince, as he chooses pleasure over staying with his family. But to King Viserys, this is nothing new. Painful as it may be to not have his brother to lean on during this dark hour of his life, this event is harmless in the grand scheme of things, and ultimately undeserving of retaliation. But eventually, issues will be pressed. In a move that shocks everyone, King Viserys names his oldest daughter, the Princess Rhaenyra, the realm's delight, as heir to the Iron Throne. His main motivation for making this move is his guilt over the death of Aemma, which was the case in canon. This is his way of making amends towards his wife. He makes their daughter his successor. This does rub Daemon the wrong way, as for years, he and many others in the realm had always seen himself as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. But to be replaced by a girl, young and untested, leaves a very sour taste. But this also brings up another question. If Rhaenyra is able to inherit regardless of gender, does that mean that even baby Visenya comes before him in the line of succession? The idea of being replaced by not only a teenager, but an infant as well, feels somewhat insulting. He does confront Viserys over this, but the king lets it be known that he didn't do this to offend Daemon in any capacity. It was just a way of setting things right for Aemma. It's what she would have wanted. But Daemon would continue to protest this, questioning if the realm would ever kneel to Rhaenyra. After all, they chose Viserys over Rhaenys during the Great Council. What would make them favor Rhaenyra any more than her? Viserys would simply reply that he was giving the people a decree, not an option, so they had no choice in the matter. They would accept it and swear fealty to his daughter, even Daemon. The situation is tense between the brothers as a result, but less emotionally charged than it was before, and not centered around the disrespect of a lost child. Still, enraged by his loss of status, Daemon resolves to leave court. Instead of being exiled by his brother, this is an action solely on him. He takes Miss Arya and occupies Dragonstone in defiance of his elder brother. And Viserys allows him to play this game for a time. So the months pass on, and the royal family adjusts to the new normal without Aemma. Rhaenyra is getting used to being her father's new heir, but takes well to being an older sister. Despite the trauma surrounding the birth of her younger sister, she does her best not to hold it against her. She didn't ask to be born, and by all means is still her mother's child, the only thing that remains of her besides herself. She spends as much time as she can with her younger sister, often being seen carrying her around the grounds of the Red Keep, and at times refusing to let the servants take her, though she will let Alicent hold her from time to time, and the baby seems to like her well enough. She knows the servants don't mean any harm, but she's still very protective. This is her only sibling after all, and the fear that she could lose her like Aemma is ever present. Alicent does assure her that this will never happen, but if the world has proven anything, it can be cruel and unpredictable. In the months after the death of Queen Aemma, the topic of remarriage is brought up for King Viserys. Even with the addition of a new baby girl to the Targaryen line, it's still exceedingly thin, boasting only 4 members at this time. In the king, his daughters, his brother, who has no children of his own, and technically his cousin Rhaenys, whose children are only Velaryons. All it takes is for something to go wildly wrong, and the ruling house of Westeros could face extinction, especially with mounting tensions posed by Daemon's occupation of Dragonstone. And as it stands, the crown only has one dragon rider in Rhaenyra with Daemon away, so strengthening the line is imperative. The king is only given one formal offer from Corlys Velaryon to marry his daughter, Laena, but since the death of Queen Aemma, the Lady Alicent Hightower has been gradually pushed towards the king by her father Otto like before. And given the time they've spent together, Viserys already has an existing attachment to her. But on a deeper note, things have been a bit hard for Viserys with the death of his wife. While he tries most days, he doesn't know how to react and deal with his infant daughter. Most days he can barely look at her without seeing Aemma. He killed her just for Visenya to be born. But more than that, he hadn't even wanted Visenya. He wanted a son. He felt like a failure when he saw her, and oftentimes felt guilty about the circumstances surrounding her birth. That didn't mean he loved her any less on the account of her gender and his own misplaced expectations, but there were days where he could barely hold her without recalling all the wrongs he'd committed. Perhaps the child could pick up on that, as most times, when he would dismiss servants in an effort to have some meaningful alone time with his daughter, the infant would often cry when held by her father, and Viserys wouldn't know what to do. Or at least he would try to do something, things that worked on Rhaenyra when she was a baby, and it didn't seem to work. It would be in moments like this, where if Alicent was around, she would take charge of Visenya, if she proved too much for the king. Given all the time she spent with Rhaenyra, she knew her way around the child, who was very comfortable around Lady Hightower. These moments communicated to the king that maybe Alicent wouldn't be so bad to have as a mother to his future children, seeing how easily she takes to Visenya and is able to calm her down when he cannot. He takes it as some seal of approval. So later on, when the issue is pressed, he does declare that he will marry Lady Alicent Hightower, which angers the Sea Snake, who storms out to later seek the help of the king's brother in the Stepstones. And this great betrayal causes Rhaenyra to have some distance between her father and former friend, something that only gets worse over time, as within the coming years, Alicent begins to aid in the rebuilding of the Targaryen family, giving birth to the first of the king's sons, Aegon. Interestingly, in this timeline, when Aegon is born, I believe Viserys actually considers naming him Balon after his father, given that the heir for a day was never born here. But in my opinion, he refrains from doing so. The reason I have for this is that Viserys had always imagined Balon to be his son with Aemma. That was the name that they had chosen together should their child have been a boy. So in a way, it felt wrong to give that name to his son with Alicent, while still having those lingering attachments to his first wife, so he sticks with the name Aegon instead. Rhaenyra, as before, does not like her new baby brother because she views him as competition. She doesn't really make the effort to interact with him growing up, instead choosing to spend most of her time with Visenya, now 3, edging towards 4. At such a young age, Visenya already appears to be a headstrong young girl, not unlike her older sister. She likes to have her way with things, and often gets angry when told no. Rhaenyra adores her sister, and during her younger years, she seems to be the only sibling she actively recognizes as her own. She takes care to speak with her and hold her, but most importantly, she tries to teach her. Despite sharing blood, the two of them unfortunately can't share memories. They have the same mother, but the experiences are a different story. It's painful, but also unavoidable, that despite being born by her, Visenya will never know her mother, Aemma Arryn, or have the chance to love her in the same way that Rhaenyra did. In hopes of remedying that, she spends a lot of time telling Visenya stories about their mother as she grows up, things she liked to do, the clothes she wore, and food she liked to eat, in order to help paint the image of who their mother was when she was alive, even giving her little things that belonged to her mother when she was alive. Something that Visenya is grateful for, but as the years pass on, it does become clear that while she appreciates these gifts from her sister, they don't hold the same value for her as they do for Rhaenyra. Something that really drives home that lack of connection is that as she gets older, when she talks with Rhaenyra about their mother, she doesn't refer to her as such. She simply calls her Aemma. What did Aemma do? What was Aemma like? Do you miss Aemma? For an example. It's difficult to give the motherly title to a woman you've never known a day in your life, a memory that you've never shared with anyone else. She hasn't even seen a portrait of the woman before. The hard truth is, every time Visenya tries to think of Aemma, or her mother, the only one she can think of is Alicent Hightower, who she's been calling mother since the day she could form words. In fact, mommy had been her very first word, and that had only been said when she was in the arms of Queen Alicent. This was something that infuriated Rhaenyra, and played into why she tried so hard to keep Aemma's memory alive in her younger sister. She hates the feeling that the woman who birthed her was slowly being erased, but her sister can't foster an emotion that was never there to begin with. But Rhaenyra would learn that in time. This particular segment of the story all stays the same. The King's Hunt, the White Hart, Otto's failed marriage of Rhaenyra and Aegon, then the return of Daemon from the Stepstones with Corlys Velaryon. And for a brief moment in time, Alicent and Rhaenyra seem to rekindle their friendship. Rhaenyra even grows a newfound respect for Alicent, for taking care of her younger sister, in addition to her own children, who are driving her up a wall. She treats Visenya like she were her own daughter, and she really appreciates that. It even tells Alicent at one point that she was sure Aemma would appreciate it too. For a time, all seems right with the world. Until the dreaded events that transpire between the rogue prince and his niece, and later on with her and Criston Cole, which culminates in the dismissal of Otto Hightower, the marriage of Rhaenyra to Laenor, and later on the death of Joffrey Lonmouth, tensions rise once again, especially after the birth of Rhaenyra's 3 plain featured sons. During these years, Visenya becomes an interesting character, having grown into herself somewhat, still keeping her headstrong and confident attitude. Visenya is very sociable, makes friends pretty easily, but it's not uncommon for her to get in trouble by pulling pranks on others with her brother Aegon, though she does know when she may be going a bit too far with her fun. At this age, she even has a dragon born from an egg hatching in her cradle, the very same one that Rhaenyra picked out for her, which was stolen by Daemon in the canon timeline. That didn't happen here, given that she was still alive. And not even Daemon will steal an egg from a baby. Maybe Candy, but I digress. The beast somewhat resembles Vhagar in its coloring, with green scales and silver-gray wing membranes, that she calls Eris. A young dragon, almost as feisty as the girl herself. The two arguably have a bond that rivals that of Aegon and his dragon Sunfire. Visenya and her brother Aegon are often seen competing with each other in the dragon pit as well. Unlike her older sister, Visenya actually gets along with her half-siblings. In fact, she doesn't even make the distinction between them being half-siblings. Aegon, Helaena, Aemon, and Daeron are just her family, her brothers and sister. She grew up with them, and is the closest to them in age, Aegon being born some months after her. The two are practically twins, having known each other all their lives, from the moment they could walk. Though she can find him obnoxious at times and often smacks him for being mean to Aemond, often echoing the words of their mother Alicent, that he shouldn't treat their brother that way. But even so, in some strange way, she finds that part of her younger brother somewhat endearing. The two of them get along well enough, even though they butt heads, and Aegon at times seems to have a certain favor for her over their sister Helaena. Even if she gets angry with him, at least he can understand what she's saying half the time. In a way, Visenya is a bit of a connecting point for the families, or at least she tries to bridge the gap between Rhaenyra and their siblings at times, though it's a well-known fact that her older sister never really takes to it. She talks it up to her just being older and being at a different stage in her life as a mother and heir to the Iron Throne, but there's no love lost for her older sister. She respects and admires her almost as much as she does her mother Alicent. Speaking of which, like before, Rhaenyra tries to seal the festering cracks in the family by offering to marry Helaena to her oldest son Jace in this timeline as well. Alicent, once again, refuses this match, not wanting her daughter to marry a bastard like Jace. She says she'll consider it, when she really won't, and ends the meeting early by telling King Viserys that he needs to rest before Rhaenyra can say or offer anything else. In light of this, and the spreading rumors in King's Landing, Rhaenyra once again resolves to move to Dragonstone so she can raise her family away from scrutiny. But before she leaves, she actually makes a request of her father Viserys. She would like to take her sister, Visenya, to foster on Dragonstone with her. There are multiple reasons why she wants this. On one hand, she doesn't cherish the thought of spending so much time away from her only full-blooded sibling. She loves Visenya dearly and doesn't want to abandon her. And on the other hand, she doesn't want Visenya to be used as leverage against her. Knowing that things will more than likely come to blows with the Hightowers, she would prefer if her sister wasn't to be used as a bargaining chip. Viserys hears this, sees the sense in it, but then says he would need to speak with Alicent about it. Rhaenyra then tries to put her foot down, saying that he doesn't. Visenya is his child, not hers. She should not have a say in their family. But Viserys would disagree, saying that she's the only mother Visenya has ever known. They love each other, and she has the right to an opinion on this matter. Like it or not, she is family, by marriage and motherhood. Rhaenyra has no choice but to concede to her father, though it still makes her angry. Once informed, Alicent would get a sense of what this is really about, given that she was trying to avoid this with Helaena as well. Not only wanting to keep her from a marriage to a bastard, but to prevent her from being used against them in the future. Visenya leaving King's Landing would be something dangerous. While she does love Visenya, having spent all these years being a mother to her, she knows how important of a political piece she really is. The second oldest child of the king. With Rhaenyra being named heir and Viserys seemingly disregarding gender when it came to inheritance, there was an argument to be made that Visenya came before Aegon in the line of succession as well. She arguably had a decent claim to the Iron Throne. Given her political strength, she shuddered to think what would happen if she went to Dragonstone. That was time that could be used to turn her against them, or used against them. What if Rhaenyra orchestrated a match between Visenya and Viserys? Given her standing in the succession, especially in comparison to the pup sister Harwin, she could easily be used to strengthen Jace's claim to the Iron Throne, as Helaena would have been. So she does what she can to deter Viserys from this course of action, saying that life on Dragonstone wouldn't suit Visenya. Unlike her namesake, she was not some renowned warrior who could handle seclusion brought by the island. She had friends in King's Landing, she loved her siblings, her life here. It would be cruel to uproot her for no apparent reason. There is no merit in sending her away to Dragonstone. After all, it was supposed to be the home of the heir to the throne, and her children if that's what she wanted. But not her sister. It really wouldn't serve the crown a purpose. She really puts the screws to Viserys, who is as indecisive as ever. Ultimately, he comes to what he believes is a reasonable solution to this problem, which is to let Visenya decide what she wants to do. She has the right to, after all, so she's summoned and faces her father, sister, and the woman she calls mother. The details are given and she has to make a choice. I believe that Visenya chooses to stay in King's Landing. As much as she loves Rhaenyra and her nephews, Alicent is right. She didn't care much for living her life on a secluded island. She enjoyed life at court. In fact, she felt that she excelled best here. King's Landing was her home, and for the time being, she'd rather not leave, though it didn't mean that she couldn't mount her dragon and come visit her sister from time to time either. In her eyes, it was really no big deal if she just decided to stay. It wasn't as if this would be the last time they ever saw each other, or that they couldn't write to each other, or that Rhaenyra couldn't come back home at some point. Her sister definitely wouldn't disappear for 6 years and never bother to check in on her family, right? So with a heavy heart, Rhaenyra has to accept this loss. She hugs her sister goodbye, promising to stay in touch before leaving with her family. We fast forward to Driftmark, and here I believe we encounter our first big change. The deaths of Laena, Harwin, and Lionel would still occur, as well as Otto's reinstatement as Hand of the King. Sometime after his return, Aegon would end up being engaged, but not to Helaena. Instead, it would be to his older sister, Visenya. This is a match that comes as a shock to Rhaenyra, and she is not happy about it. A part of her is furious for not staying in King's Landing because maybe she could have prevented that, or perhaps she could have fought harder to bring her to Dragonstone. A marriage to Visenya only served to strengthen Aegon, and she wouldn't be surprised if people started seeing this as a sign. Aegon the Conqueror had also married his sister Visenya, who had also happened to be older than him. The Greens were really taking care to build up his image. Aegon, unlike canon, wouldn't seem too opposed to marrying his older sister, in fact. He didn't like Helaena because he thought she was an idiot, always muttering things he couldn't understand. But Visenya is different, considering they're closest in age and how easy it is for the two of them to connect. Given the lack of prophetic language barriers, it's much easier to see a life with her than it is with Helaena. Visenya also isn't entirely opposed to the match either. While he could be a bit unsavory at times, Visenya believed that there were worse men to be married to, and most of the encounters that she had with her brother were generally positive. He may be a slacker, but he was at least bearable and sometimes entertaining. At this current point in the story, I don't believe I see too much deviating from the main story aside from this future marriage. Aemon would still sneak out to claim Vhagar later on after the funeral of Laena and get into a fight that costs him his eye. The fallout is also the same with Rhaenyra and Alicent basically going at each other's throats. Visenya, in my opinion, bears the most interesting perspective during this conflict because due to her upbringing, she has a more complex view of the situation. As someone who was brought up with both sides of the family, with strong connections to either, and she was never really actively pitted against the other side because she was more or less a part of both. She holds a love and understanding for everyone in the situation, and as a result, views it as one giant mess. A fight that got out of hand, and she doesn't know who or if she should support one side over the other. On the one hand, she doesn't believe that Luke tried to kill Aemond like Alicent does, or took his eye out for no good reason. But at the same time, she saw firsthand how Aemond would be treated by his brother and nephews, and wouldn't be surprised if they started something and things escalated. Even when it's revealed that Aemond called the Strongboys bastards, it still doesn't change how messy the situation was for her. Like everyone else, she also heard the rumors about her nephews, and given the time she spent with Rhaenyra and her sons, and on occasion Harwin Strong when he was around, in her eyes it was kind of obvious, though she never said anything about it. She still loved them like family, and they were good kids from what she recalled, but I believe Visenya, despite being the sister of Rhaenyra, wouldn't be willing to excuse her sister's actions like her father was. While she has nothing against the strong boys, and doesn't actively try to expose them or ruin their lives, she often feels that any and every problem that Rhaenyra has stemming from this is something that she did to herself. There is no standing in defense of anyone for her. In fact, like her younger sister Helaena, she can only look on in silence as her family divides itself before they head back to King's Landing. 6 years will go by, and by this point, Aegon will have married Princess Visenya, and I believe the two of them will have had children, and I actually think that they would have had more kids than Aegon and Helaena did. The main reason being that Aegon doesn't have to get drunk to be with Visenya like he did with Helaena. Considering that he wasn't forced to marry a woman he doesn't understand and had no desire to be with, nor had anything in common with, I believe he would be more accepting of doing his duty in this sense. They would actually have some level of a connection with each other, one he didn't seem to share with Helaena, as much as I love her, and from time to time are even known to go on dragon races around the city. Now, does this mean he doesn't cheat on Visenya? Well, that depends. Do you believe he only cheats on Helaena because he never wanted to marry her? Or because he's just a man who likes to follow his urges? Both could reasonably be true, so it's not entirely impossible for him to still cheat on Visenya in this timeline as well. Though if he ever gets caught, I imagine that Visenya will have more than a few words to say to her husband. But even with that, the princess and the prince have about 4 children together in contrast to the show. 2 more than the show in fact, and 1 more than the books. They have 3 sons and 1 daughter. Jaehaerys, Aerion, Shaena, and Mycor. The names are mostly different given that Visenya is the mother this time, making them different characters from Helena's children, and as a result, Visenya has a different thought process when naming her kids. I believe things go relatively the same during the 6-year time skip. Viserys' health declines, and the High Tower step in to run the realm. Visenya is often seen taking care of her father as he slowly declines in health, and at times even getting involved in matters of court with Alicent and Otto, to help fill in the gaps left by her ailing father. During this time, she truly makes her mark on the Red Keep and King's Landing, becoming endeared to the people, like her sister once was. After Rhaenyra returns to back Luke's claims for Driftmark, the two of them end up reconnecting. In canon, Rhaenyra didn't seem to take much effort in keeping touch with King's Landing or her father, but with Visenya around, she would have been incentivized to at least send letters and communicate with her. These letters would keep her informed on the happenings at court, and the ailing King Viserys. So in this timeline, Rhaenyra knew on some level what to expect when she returns home. But nevertheless, she's still surprised to see the state of court, the state of her father, and to see her sister's children. Things open well enough with her return. Visenya is actually the first to greet her sister when she arrives with her family, and guides them to her father. It's quite a sight for the king to see his 2 girls together, and then Rhaenyra's children, Aegon and Viserys. Soon enough, Visenya excuses herself to see her own children and husband, which allows Rhaenyra and Daemon to speak with Alicent about everything that's happened. I believe the rest of the story of Season 1 goes basically the same, even with the inclusion of Princess Visenya. Vaemond is still killed by Daemon, there is one last feast between Viserys and his family, Rhaenyra raises a toast to Queen Alicent for standing by her father through hard times, and raising her sister like her own daughter. Visenya even shares a dance with Jaehaerys in place of Helaena, who is still unmarried at this point in the story, which could come into play later. And once again, after Rhaenyra leaves, Alicent once again pushes for Aegon to be king after misinterpreting the last words of the dying king. This is where I think the story has the potential to get really interesting for this character. Obviously, Visenya is the only full-blooded sibling of Princess Rhaenyra, so her reaction to her sister being displaced in succession is pretty important. Now I believe that she would honestly be in the dark, not sure whether or not she should believe Alicent's word for what happened with Viserys. On the one hand, the way the Greens go about locking down the castle and committing summary executions for those who don't support Aegon is not a good look, and she is a bit against it. And she knows that Viserys never changed his mind about Rhaenyra in the 20 years that they've been together. But at the same time, she hadn't been in the room with King Viserys when he died, and she only ever had positive memories of Alicent, so she questions if her mother would really lie after the death of her father. It's a confusing situation that makes her feel a bit complicated on how to act, which is why I believe one of the first things Alicent would do is try to get her on board with the plan, and truly make her believe in what she believes Viserys said on his deathbed. This way, she can prevent her potentially striking out and supporting Rhaenyra, though her doing that right now is highly unlikely. Even if she did support Rhaenyra, she wouldn't want to leave her children behind in the capital, and there wasn't really a way for her to smuggle them out of the city without being noticed. There wouldn't be enough room on her dragon to carry them all the way, and the castle would notice if the heirs to the throne just suddenly went missing in the middle of the night. Regardless, Alicent would have a heartfelt conversation with Visenya, telling her that this is what her father wanted, and that Aegon would need someone like her at his side to help rule the kingdoms properly. It wasn't their wish to fight Rhaenyra, just to uphold her father's will. I ultimately feel that if Rhaenyra had a sister in Visenya, she would join the Greens, not simply because she thinks Aegon deserves the throne and is so much better than his sister, but out of a sense of loyalty to Alicent and her own children. It would be akin to what George Martin had originally planned for this series' Game of Thrones. In the OG outline of that, Sansa was supposed to marry Joffrey Baratheon and have a child with him, and as a result, side with the Lannisters during the War of Five Kings, over her own family. And it would be the same here, with a lot of potential for things to go sideways, and really drive that rift between the families even further. I believe if Aemon still kills Lucerys and Aemon orders blood and cheese, it has the means to set a harrowing new foundation for this conflict. Just imagine how things would go if Blood and Cheese ended up killing one of Visenya's sons in retaliation. The damage this would do to Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship may be irreversible. The same could even be said for Rhaenyra and Visenya, who, unlike her younger sister Helaena, may be more than willing to take action against this blow dealt to her family. But this is all I have for today. I know I only really covered Season 1 and was pretty vague on some things in this video, but it is an interesting thought to ponder, and some stuff I could reasonably see happening. You guys let me know your thoughts down below though. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.